Hey, how's it going? It's your boy, Ryan Flares Doyle, Mobalytics jungle expert here, bringing you our 10.13 low ELO tier list. Adam's taking the week off, and I just hope he doesn't go out into the sunlight, or otherwise he might turn into dust, but he's probably losing LP as we speak. Either way, you got me this time around, so be sure to say Ryan is greater than Adam down below in the comments so I can give him some more time off in the near future. As a disclaimer, we mostly use gold ELO data for this tier list, while our tiebreakers fall between our plat and silver data, which is in line with Riot's average skill level bracket. We'll show you builds for every champion in this video, but you can find them all along with all the other builds on our website, which we've linked down below. So without any further delay, let's get right into it. Starting off with our top lane S tier roster, we have Jax, Nasus, Mordekaiser, Urgot, Volibear, Set, and Fiora, and with our god tier being Garen and Darius once again. For the changes to the list this time around, we have Gnar moving up from B tier to A tier because he received a substantial buff to his hop ability this patch. Aatrox moving up from B tier to A tier as well because, let's be honest, he's a really good safe pick at the moment and he has a really good win rate the higher up you climb. And lastly, Volibear moving from A tier to S tier. Volley isn't quite god tier in lower brackets, but surely is teetering on that status. He's very close, so we'll have to keep a close eye on him for now. Which brings us to our first highlighted champion of the patch being Gnar. Littlefoot got a huge buff to his attack speed, jumping from 20% attack speed to 40% at rank 1, while the attack speed steroid is increased from 3 seconds to 4 seconds. This is definitely going to help him kite out champions while pumping out major damage in the process. It also synergizes well with his itemization, with his highest win rate item build stems from using Black Cleaver and Frozen Mallet, or if you want to lock into a split push, you can also sub out the Mallet for a Blade of the Ruined King if you so choose. You also have Conqueror getting nerfed this patch, which is a direct nerf to things like Wukong, Darius, Set, Fiora, while Gnar just either uses Grasp or Fleet Footwork, which makes you either more tanky or more slippery, which just adds to his game-changing teamfight prowess or split pushing potential. Moving on to our second highlighted champion, we got Aatrox. Like I mentioned before, Aatrox is just a really safe pick at the moment, which is why you still see pro players gravitating towards him in their drafts, and when it comes to solo queue, it just gets better the higher up you climb, which is why he's worth the time investment. Aatrox is doing a lot better as of lately against his matchups, seeing more vibrant success in lower brackets, which is why he's moving up on the list. Aatrox is still benefiting largely from his insane lifesteal that he gets from his kit. His Cleaver into Death's Dance build is just so powerful in a meta where Grievous Wounds are all but crucial, but seems to do nothing when games go later. And games going the distance is all what they tend to do in lower brackets anyways. He's still going to be a huge monster when it comes to teamfights because of the reset mechanic on his R and the huge boost to his lifesteal. Players also tend to miss position a lot, and using your ultimate for those picks help extend your monstrous teamfighting power in fights or skirmishes. And for our last highlighted champion, we have Volibear. Volibear mains are getting a little nervous watching this new beast rise to the top of stardom in both top lane and jungle and expecting the old Riot nerf hammer to swing on by. However, Volley will get another patch to flourish and hold the spotlight, especially in pro play where he's becoming a more picker ban worthy. Last time, Adam talked about a more tanky playstyle with the Conqueror build, but for top lane in the recent Conk nerfs, it's safer to say Press the Attack is a much better choice now, especially since he can proc it nearly instantly. All those hotfixes and buffs to his kit from the last patch just made him an overwhelming powerhouse and is why he's so much better for you to rush a Trinity Force into Sunfire for a more carry-oriented playstyle. Volley is just steamrolling through most melee matchups currently, and surprisingly, ranged matchups too, as players don't really tend to abuse his weaker matchups and end up getting mauled. His kit and playstyle are very one-dimensional, which means players can have an easier time playing it. His combos currently just outright burst your opponent if you can land a Sky Splitter and a Thundering Smash together, and extended trades always end up going your way if you're able to use that second W proc to do loads more damage and heal up in the process. You can also tower dive with ease since you can legit turn off the tower and find easy kills against those players who hide behind their tower to try and outplay you. But if you're still on the fence about picking up Volley, we got a Volibear for Dummies guide to help you along and get started on your path to free LP. Moving on to my home sweet home, starting off with our S tier roster will be Master Yi, Zac, Warwick, Nunu and Willem, Graves, Fiddlesticks, Echo, and our god tier being Volibear and Kayn. For the changes to the list, we have Poppy and Sejuani headed down to the Shadow Realm as both picks simply cannot survive in the current meta. Olaf is moving down from A to B tier because of the Conqueror nerfs, and as well as the fact Olaf drops off in power the later the game goes, and with the power being taken away from his best keystone, it's likely going to hurt his win rate substantially. We also have Ivern and Rek'Sai joining the B tier roster, as both champions are great to put some time into where you see results the higher you climb, but in lower end brackets they just rely on your teammates too heavily and lack the means to close out games themselves, as Rek'Sai falls off in the late game and Ivern just has no means to brain control 4 of your other teammates to play perfectly. We have J4 headed back to A tier because of his jack of all trades playstyle is just too hard to kill off and remains flexible for all different types of situations. You got the full tank build, full lethality, support build, bruiser build, he can do it all. We're also going to be moving Nocturne from B tier to A tier because of the direct buffs to his passive this patch. This one's a little bit more of a prediction, but we're going to be moving Nunu from A tier to S tier. This one might leave you scratching your heads, but hang on a sec, I'll explain it to you in more detail. We got Graves from God tier to S tier because he just cannot keep up with Volibear or Kayn, but still remains a great power pick. And speaking of Volibear, I'm using my executive privilege as the jungle expert to move Volley from S tier to God tier. On the account, he has legit 0 losing matchups at the moment. So for our first jungle highlight, we got Nunu and Willow. Nunu is the premier utility tank jungler that nobody wants to play because he's gotten that bad rep of being a no-skill boring champ. And while I'm inclined to agree, that doesn't mean you shouldn't play him for easy LP. There's actually this Korean Nunu playstyle where the build is Predator with Cinderhulk into a Hextech Protobelt Rush. But with the new Predator changes, players are returning to take that Aftershock build, but still incorporating that Protobelt into their build for a more carry potential. It's cheap, gives you health to pair nicely with your Cinderhulk, 10% CDR, AP that'll boost your damage output, but the active is what makes it come around full circle. You see, your E has a bit of a timer on it before you can root and lock down your target, and if you pair that with the fact that many champions have some sort of dash in their kit, it definitely gives a ton of breathing room to escape from. But by using the active, you can reposition to secure the snare with a little extra damage to throw in there as well. And as always, Nunu is really unbeatable when it comes to neutral objectives. It's nearly impossible to mess up your Q plus Smite combo, which means you can safely avoid those 50-50 Smite fights and have a much better time getting your Dragon Souls or Rift Heralds. For our second highlighted champion, we have Nocturne. Nocturne got a massive buff to his passive this patch, which will increase his clear speed exponentially. Getting to that level 6 power spike is just way easier now, but now you'll have some much needed fighting power. Conqueror also got a nerf this patch, which doesn't hurt him at all because you'll be taking lethal tempo, but what the Conqueror nerfs did do was weaken his counter matchups, which will now allow him to win those extended skirmishes. Think things like Olaf or Lee Sin, for example. You also have your spell shield to give you that outplay potential to soak a key damaging ability and give you a bigger burst of attack speed, which again is boosting your damage output even further because your passive will be up much quicker. Your fear is what's going to win you most skirmishes because now that your passive is up much quicker, your lethal tempo will be on, your passive attack speed bonus from your spell shield will be on, all of this bundled together will allow you to topple anybody who looks at your direction. I predict a more bruiser-oriented playstyle around Warriors and Black Cleaver this patch to outshine the lethality one, but on account of these changes, I guess we'll have to wait and see, huh? And for our last highlighted champion, we have Volibear. Again? Yep, Volibear, like I mentioned before, it has literally 0 losing matchups currently, but Ross Form, Kayn, or Dr. Mundo put up the best fight. Adam also highlighted Conquer for Volley last patch, but after playing 100 games of Volibear in my ranked games, I've seen more success with Predator up until around Masters Plus, where PTA is just much more superior. It's not to say PTA is bad or anything, but Volley is just incredibly strong at the moment. You can opt in to use Predator as a way to force ganks or engages incredibly well. Move speed is an extremely valuable stat, and with Predator, you don't have to feel the need to buy a Righteous Glory and lose out on those damage or tank stats for picks or engagements. It's also extremely effective for ganks because you won't need to use your Q to gap close and you can just use your Predator instead to close that distance. Then use your Q when it's guaranteed to land. Slows are the counter to his Q after all. More so, I'd say Predator is like a pair of training wheels for your bicycle, and when you really feel out the champ and have a better grasp of the champion, then you can swap out to PTA instead. Moving on to the mid lane for our starting S tier roster, we have Annie, Lux, Galio, Orianna, Echo, Yasuo, and Katarina, and the god tier still remaining with Fizz and Diana. For the changes to the list, we have Fiddlesticks moving from off the list to B tier. We felt it was necessary to slap him onto the list because of the success it had in the top lane, and it translates well into the mid lane as well, with the extra added help that it had with its pro play presence. Kiana is getting added back on the list and will rest in B tier for now. She's just extremely mechanically and meta dependent and isn't doing so hot, but we felt that she's doing just well enough to add her on. Veigar moves from B tier to A tier on account that he just does so well the later games go and counters the heavy melee meta at the moment. Lux moving from A tier to S tier, and before you get angry, she's holding a higher win rate and play rate than some of our other S tier colleagues like Annie and Galio. And Orianna moves from A tier to S tier as well because she just performs better and better the higher up the ladder you go, making her a champion worth the time investment to see incredible results down the road. So that leads me to our first highlighted mid champion, that being Orianna. Orianna is another one of those safe picks that you see in pro play all the time because she has an easy laning phase which translates into scaling into an exceptional teamfight control mage that can turn a game around with the press of a button. When she gets ahead or a lead on you, however, she feels absolutely oppressive. Her abilities allow her to farm or shove out waves decently quickly because of their low mana cost, which is kind of comparable to Syndra. Orianna being able to spam her Qs and zone with the ball helps her being a lane bully and denying countless farm and thread huge burst damage, especially when you use your W right after. She also does extremely well into your LeBlanc, Zoe, Syndra, and Yasuo matchups and pairs well with the many engage style champions in the meta currently for you to really make those wombo combo plays, so be sure to go ahead and give her a try. Moving on to our next champion, we have Lux. Lux is another one of those champions with a negative light shining down on her for being a boring, easy, no-skill champ to play. However, Lux dazzles her lane opponents thanks to her added slow from her E she received a couple patches ago. When you take into account she also got buffs to her shield, it really makes trading onto her feel really difficult. It's also a melee-heavy meta, which means champions gotta run at you to kill you. But you can just use your snare since they'll be easy targets and one-shot combo them with your W and ultimate. Lux just outshines and is favored in matchups such as Irelia, LeBlanc, Talon, Akali, Zoe, Syndra, Zed, Galio, Twisted Fate, and Diana. And she has very few hard losing matchups, which means she's a perfect pickup at the moment. Just be sure to be careful around the Pyke middle, Xerath, and Vel'Koz, and you'll be good to go. For our last mid lane champion spotlight, we have Fiddlesticks. Yep, Fiddlesticks mid is getting some hype after its debut in pro play, and all it really is the tank build that's been popular recently in the top lane. It still plays out the same way with building tank items first and using your drain to outsustain your opponent's trades while simultaneously trading back onto them. By doing this, you'll also be shoving the waves naturally, which gives you free reign to rotate to your side lanes or help your jungler for scuttles. Personally, it's probably the most optimal in the mid lane than top lane because you are free to roam where you please and aren't really left on an island top lane. And ganks are still free because you can just chain CC with your Fear and Silence, and your damage output will still feel busted with Crowstorm's insane damage output paired with everything else your kit provides. It's just very overloaded. Next up for our ADC S tier champions, we have Jinx, Ashe, Caitlyn, Jhin, and Vayne, with the sole god tier AD carry is Ezreal, who still remains supreme for another patch. Fingers crossed we see some nerfs for him, so please make it happen, Mr. Yetter. For the changes to the list, we have Aphelios dropping down from A tier to B tier thanks to the heavy nerfs he received this patch to his ratios. Varus moves from B tier to A tier thanks to his weaker matchups getting nerfed and lethality still being strong on him. And Xayah moving from B tier to A tier as well because in the light of the previous buffs as well as other oppressive matchups getting nerfed. So for our first highlighted champ we have Lucian. Lucian is not moving this patch because he is still extremely hard to play and perfectly weaving in your combos and lower brackets doesn't really happen. He's not quite S tier in his current state, but he is really close. However, the changes to his Q was really helpful, that being it was increased from 900 to 1000 range, which is good for clearing minions but mostly for his poke. The buffs helped increase his best way to harass longer ranged matchups and do free damage when you line up with an incoming minion wave to help your shoving power. It's also almost double the range of an auto attack, which means most players cannot even return fire and it's easier to chunk down your opponents. Lucian is still amazing in the early and late game, but still retains that dip in power spike when he's waiting for enough item power spikes to really start hitting hard. Blade of the Ruined King is an amazing item early into those beefy team comps. Essence Reaver is good, but really doesn't benefit until you've completed your Infinity Edge, which is why he isn't quite S tier, but can still outplay his opponents and is still relatively one of the safest ADCs too. So moving on to our next champ, we have Xayah. Xayah comes in and out of the meta all of the time, but this patch, her lever got a bit of a boost, as well as Aphelios and Kalista receiving direct nerfs really opens the floodgates for the lovers duo, or even just Xayah herself to start popping off more. Xayah really isn't special until she hits her 2-item power spike of Essence Reaver and IE, but when you do, you'll have so much more AD and 50% crit, which is amazing for those mid-game team fights. Her ultimate also got buffed last patch to push players to use it more offensively, where it deals 125 to 375 damage as opposed to 100 to 200 from before. What this did was make her mid and late game even better for what it once was before, which is already one of her strong suits. You add in the fact that she's ultra safe, hard to shut down, great at carrying and peeling herself, but her W is just nutty. People just tend to forget that it's not just more attack speed, but it's also empowering each of your auto attacks by an additional 20%, which is why when you have your crit items, you're incredibly strong. And for our final ADC spotlight, we have Varus. Varus was nerfed last patch when Riot took the Negan baseball bat to Varus, lowering both his AD growth and AD ratios on his piercing arrow. High-ELO still has a huge priority on it at the moment, but this is the low elo video, so what's the deal? Well, lethality Varus is probably still the easiest, most annoying, and anti-fun thing to play against. All you really have to do is just poke, poke, poke. Most of the time, it's just hard to dodge, and if you don't, well, I don't know what to tell you, but you've lost most of your health anyways. Lethality Varus is just too hard to get rid of at the moment. It doesn't necessarily scale as well as it did before, but it's still just so good early. Just be sure to try and focus on winning that laning phase, and you're all set and good to go for some free LP. Last but surely not least, our S tier roster for support is going to be Soraka, Nami, Senna, and Thresh, with our god tier being Blitzcrank, Lulu, and Bard. For the changes to the list, we have Shaco, Xerath, and Vel'Koz all coming from off the list to B tier this patch, as they're holding their own quite well, but with just a very low play rate. We have both Karma and Morgana climbing up from B tier to A tier, as both provide beneficial utility and are outperforming their B tier underclassmen. And lastly, Yuumi is going from S tier to A tier, as we predict the mana changes to her heal will just leave her in a weaker state. Not that I'm complaining, good riddance. So for the final stretch of highlights, we'll be starting off with none other than Karma. Karma is finding her footing once again in the meta, being a great enchanter support for her team. Karma provides great poke thanks to her mantra Qs, or just Qs in general, since it's easy to poke players out because you can tag them while they hug the backline minions. Your tether and shield combo really help make ganks more successful, and when you build Athene's Unholy Grail and Ardent Censer together, you are just an enchanting powerhouse. You'll be poking with your Qs, which will make it easier for you to maximize your Grail to its fullest potential, and heal your allies while dishing out damage. You'll also feel incredibly powerful, considering most enchanter items have a good amount of heal and shield power, plenty of cooldown reduction, and a good amount of AP to increase your damage output, so you can still deal some good damage without feeling like a shield bot. For the next champ, we have Janna. Janna is oh so close to making into our S tier roster, but falls just short because enchanters like Lulu, Nami, and Soraka are just outperforming her and doing her job just much better at the moment. Janna is not particular in using the Aerie or Guardian setup because most Jannas just use Comet and W spam for the great amount of harassment it provides. What makes Janna good though is that she is easy to play and more forgiving than some of the other supports we got on the tier list. She also is just one of the best supports for disengages in a melee heavy meta looking to get onto your backline. So providing that extra peel and disengage really allows your team to regroup, refocus, and retaliate onto your enemies. Her kit helps make escaping ganks easier thanks to the increased movement speed she provides, and is probably best for her to play as a KDA player, as she is extremely squishy and doesn't really need to make any flashy plays to be useful for her team. And lastly, for our final support spotlight, we have Soraka. Soraka has been through so much this season, first being an overpowered unkillable machine in the top lane, to being gutted, then being buffed patch after patch after patch, regaining all of the things that made her broken in the first place, but nobody seems to be picking up on it. She's still incredibly strong, and that's why she still remains in the S tier, but I think players should be abusing her even more than what she is already. Most players nowadays are opting into the W max playstyle, which is to say extremely powerful and annoying if you're playing against it. Her mana costs were reduced over time, which makes spamming abilities much easier as well. She spikes as soon as she gets that crispy ultimate of hers, which is pretty much a game changer in most situations. She has a really safe lane phase and counters the likes of Thresh, Morgana, Nautilus, Leona, Set, Pyke, and Rakan, and Lux, but sadly falls short against champs like Blitzcrank, Janna, Bard, and Sona. And that's all from me, folks. Thank you all so much for watching our tier list video for patch 10.13. I've been your host, Ryan Flares Doyle, and again, be sure to let me know how I did down below in the comments so I can snatch Adam's job from out from underneath them. Otherwise, be sure to check out our other awesome content on this channel, as well as over at Mobalytics.gg. As always, have a wonderful rest of your day. Be safe out there. Remember that you matter, and good luck out there on the Rift Summoners.